And welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on tonight's program, Silicon Valley is steering a revolution to make cars smart enough to drive themselves. And meet a San Jose native who stars in the Tony Award-winning hit Hamilton. But first, more signs of chaos in the Trump administration. Today, White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer resigned, saying he strongly disagreed with President Trump's pick for a communications director. Meanwhile, the Senate debate over health care continues. On Tuesday, the GOP bill looked all but dead when several Republican lawmakers refused to repeal Obamacare without a plan to replace it. But after President Trump met with wavering Republicans on Wednesday, Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell said he would now try to open debate on the legislation next week. And in Sacramento, the state's cap-and-trade program to lower greenhouse gas emissions was extended to 2030. It's a victory for Governor Jerry Brown, who lobbied hard to win bipartisan support for the program.
Because climate change is real. It is a threat to organized human existence. Maybe not in my life. I'll be dead. What am I, 79? Do I have 5 years more? Do I have 10 years more? 15? I don't know. 20? I don't know. I don't even want that long. But most of you people, when I look out here, a lot of you people are going to be alive. And you're going to be alive in a horrible...
And joining me now are KQED's politics and government reporter Marisa Lagos, Republican consultant Sean Walsh, and Politico senior writer Carla Marinucci. Welcome to you all. Sean, let's start with you. The other Sean Spicer, has quit. Big news of the day. You were once an assistant press secretary in both the Reagan and the George H.W. Bush White House. What do you make of this?
It's not a surprise. Mr. Spicer lost the confidence of the president, and he couldn't stay in that role anymore. And now you have a new communications director, and he was going to be basically put into a closet and do talking points. So it's no surprise that he left, and it was only a matter of time.
But Sean, you've done this job. You've seen, how do you characterize how Sean Spicer did the job? And what does it say about the divisions in this Trump White House? You've got Jared and Ivanka pushing this new guy, Anthony Scaramucci. And Reince Priebus looks on the out. This looks like a disaster, really.
Well, it's an audience of one. So I think the president didn't think that Mr. Spicer was defending him and appropriately putting his messages forward. And he felt compelled himself to do it on his Twitter. I'm not sure anybody, honestly, can live up to what the president's expectations are. Now, this guy's very smooth on television, and I think he'll play that role. But being a White House communications director is a big job, a hard job. So.
Right, and he has to have relationships with the press, even if it is not the best one at this point with the Trump White House. He has to please his boss, and then, as you mentioned, there's all these factions within the White House. So I do think, in a way, it's sort of an impossible job, and it's kind of shocking that Sean Spicer held on as long as he did, because we've been hearing rumors of his ousting for, I think, months now.
And Scaramucci's predecessor, Mike Duffy, resigned in May. I mean, he only lasted several months on the job. What's your prediction, if you will, for how long Scaramucci might last? And because, Trump is someone who seems to think that he is his own best spokesman. Is there anyone who can actually do that job efficiently and effectively?
Apparently, Mr. Trump believes that he can do that job efficiently and effectively. So I just think you've got a short clock on these things. So it depends on how well Scaramucci does on television interviews, I think, is how long he'll be in that job.
I don't think it's unusual to have tension between a press secretary, spokesman, and executives, right? I mean, we've seen this in governor administrations in Sacramento.
But it's the amount of tension between the press secretary and the press that's interesting. How do you see that? Because in the administrations you worked in, and I've worked with you as a press secretary, I've never seen quite the embattlement going on.
You're going to still see it. So you have Sarah Huckabee, who's now been officially given that role. She's still going to be combative because the president wants her to be combative in these roles. So that's what he's asking for. What was really telling today is almost always, when you have a new press secretary coming in, the president walks into the press briefing room, says, this is my gal or my guy. And so it sends a message to the entire world that full faith and confidence of what this person says is the rule of what the president and the government's doing. That did not happen today. You've got a guy that almost no one knows. He shows up, says, I'm in charge. And by the way, I report directly to the president, not to the chief of staff.
Let's talk about the other big story this week, too, also Russia and Sessions, right? I mean, there was an extraordinary interview with the New York Times when President Trump said that he would never have made Jeff Sessions Attorney General if he had known Sessions was going to recuse himself from the Russia matter. As a Republican strategist, what is your take on that?
Oh, my God. He's got one friend in the Justice Department, and that's Jeff Sessions, his earliest backer and supporter. And he drops shade on him big time yesterday.
Well, he thought Sessions would be a greater friend if he did not recuse himself. That seems to be the message that he's giving.
Well, there's a backstory there about why he recused himself and communications lapses that happened in the White House. It will take too long to explain here, but there is a backstory there. The real problem is he took on Mueller head on. And he threatened Mueller and other people in the Justice Department and his investigators. These guys are consummate Washington insiders. They're tough prosecutors, and this will be a disaster. You do not want a war with these people because they have full investigative power.
I mean, I think this speaks back to the challenges for the new press secretary, right? It's like if you have a president who wants to sort of control everything, and you have someone like Sessions who, and he wants loyalty, right? So there's no sort of opportunity for independence. I mean, I thought when I saw that interview, okay, here's actually an opportunity for Sessions to sort of stake out some ground as independent, to say, you know what, Mr. President, I had to do that. That was what was right. That was the law. And I am going to be independent. He didn't do that. He's finally put out a statement, I think a day later, basically saying I'm not going to resign, and that's it.
But even the shocking thing after that interview has been some of the stories that have come out, the fact that they're trying to undermine Mueller as we speak in the White House with messaging that he has conflicts of interest, et cetera. The fact that the president may be thinking about trying to pardon himself or members of his family. How does the press secretary deal with all that?
It's all terrible. And what you should do is what you should do what Bill Clinton did when he had his problems. You basically say, I've got outside legal teams. It all goes to them. They handle it and they control it. You don't want this in the White House because you don't want trails of what information is going back, and you want attorney-client privilege with your outside lawyers. You want Mr. McGahn, the White House counsel, for the most part, coordinating with them, and less is more in this case.
What do you think he will try to get Mueller fired? What do you think he'll ultimately try to do here?
If he fires Mr. Mueller, I think you do have a Saturday night-like massacre on your hands, and I think you'll see some of those more moderate members of the Republican Senate actually talking about looking at investigating the president.
Well, who would do the firing, though? Because he can't do the firing directly. Sessions has recused himself. Would it be Rod Rosenstein who would have to do the firing?
Yes.
I don't think Rosenstein would do the firing.
Well, that's the whole Nixon Senate massacre. So he would tell Rosenstein to do it. Rosenstein, I'm
that's
almost
the
90%
assistant,
certain,
the
would
deputy
say no,
attorney general.
He'd quit. And he'd keep going down the food chain to find somebody that he would. Eventually they found Bork to fire.
Right.
And so they would find somebody. It might be the janitor, but they'd get the Justice Department to find somebody to do it.
I mean,
and
we saw this with Sally Yates, right? I mean, that
Correct.
was she was a holdover from Obama, but you have seen Trump sort of, to Carla's point, explore all options. And I don't think we should assume that he will fire him yet, but it seems like they want every option on the table.
But here's something important. So, and in fairness to the president, every special counsel, every one of them went far outside of their purview, and they went after the presidents on issues that they weren't supposed to look at. Whitewater and land dealings become sex with an intern.
Right.
And we do not need this in this country right now. So setting up some parameters and looking at the issues, I think is fine. But and I think his lawyers should be doing that, not the president.
But doesn't the president's finances have to do with this? I mean, at what point do you stop? This is like a spider web at this point.
But you know, the president's finances. So the issue is, was there collusion with the Russian government to affect the election? Not did Donald Trump have business dealings with the Russians 10 or 15 years ago, or his kids?
Absolutely, but if you have people involved in some of those business dealings sitting in on meetings with Russian
Manafort,
agents,
right,
and Jared Kushner, I think, we don't know. We don't know the
We
details.
don't. And Mueller has been given broad powers, right? And like you said, we saw Ken Starr go from Whitewater to the Monica Lewinsky investigation. So we're going to keep an eye on that. But something else that I know you guys have all been keeping an eye on is healthcare. And it's been
right?
Yes, it's been a week of whiplash. I mean, Sean, it seems to be the summer of discontent, not only for Trump but for the Republican Party. The collapse of the healthcare plan this week. How much of that bill's troubles stem from Trump, and how much of it stems from divisions within the Republican Party?
Actually, I put it almost all on Congress, not on President Trump. So, number one, they made a fundamental mistake. They should have put transportation up first. then they should have gone to taxes, then they should have gone to health care. And so get some wins under your belt, make some, bipartisan moves. They went with health care first, and it distills to a bumper sticker. 22 million people thrown out, 32 million people. If you can distill a message to that level, you got a problem, number one. Number two, the Senate leader should never have put up a bill that he knew he didn't have the votes for. It just makes him look terrible.
Yeah, it almost felt like he sort of threw up his hands a couple of weeks ago and went, fine, we're just going to vote on this. And I've heard some people say maybe he wins even if he loses. I'm not sure that that's totally true, but I mean, I do think that this does sort of illustrate these deep divisions, right? You have people on the right, including Ted Cruz and other senators, who came off saying this is, we want deep cuts to Medicaid. This isn't going far enough. And then you have people more moderate, Susan Collins of Maine and others saying, we can't bring this home to our constituents. And so finding common ground in that, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's Mitch McConnell's battle to lose, but the president could have stepped in and offered some leadership.
Doesn't he get have responsibility here? That was one of his key campaign promises, repeal and replace Obamacare. Then he's changed. Then he went to repeal only. Now we're not sure where he's at.
Look, because of all the problems the president has, I don't think that the legislature, Congress is working well with him. So I think to that extent, he has not played a constructive or helpful role. There was a really easy solution to this, to be honest with you. I would have walked in the door and said, guess what? Mitt Romney is right. Every state should have their own health care thing they want. I'm block granting money to the states. So here is X hundreds of billions of dollars. Every state gets a piece. If you want to have Kaiser be your health care provider for your whole state, great. If you want community clinics, fine. What works in North Dakota, not necessarily going to work in New York State. Give it to the states, let them figure it out. And so it would have been easy politics. Easy.
And speaking of politics at the state level, I mean, what you see here actually is a really interesting compare and contrast, right, between President Trump, who didn't take an active role on the health care bill, and then in California on cap and trade, you see Governor Brown out there
staking his fortune.
That's right. Exactly. He was going to legislative committee meetings, which governors never do. Yeah. And giving this impassioned speech about how this isn't about me, I'm going to be dead. It's going to be about all you. He cajoled people. He worked with people. He knew what he needed in terms of votes across the aisle, and he went for it. That is the big difference with the President Trump, is it not?
And is that where experience comes in, right? And also he engaged in something that Trump disdains, which is old-fashioned politics.
I think it's also about sort of philosophy, right? Like, do you look at politics as a win or lose game, or for Brown, I think in this case, he looks at this as an important, one of the most important initiatives that he has undertaken as governor.
But in fairness, do the math. You've got basically supermajorities in both houses, so he had 2/3 of the Democrats. So he went out and did that.
But he didn't get.
And so that's the ugly part of where the Republicans are fighting right now, is because they believe a lot of Republicans gave him probably the biggest win of his legacy in his career. And so having the Republicans go out and not actually articulate that it would have been way, way worse if they didn't go with this. Doing the Kumbaya press conference with Mr. May, and it was bad politics. But he had the numbers. And if he couldn't get this done with 2/3 vote,
he also got the business community behind him, though.
Because there was a Supreme Court decision that basically said, if you don't do this, then you can say this is a fee with 50% vote and not a 2/3 vote of a tax. So it was going to be way, way worse if the Republicans didn't go along with this than what they have near cap and trade versus a carbon tax.
And let me just say, though, too, I'm not sure it's bad politics. It may be bad politics for Chad Mays within the party, and party leaders outside of the Capitol are calling for his head. The caucus met on Thursday, and they did not oust him yet. But I think it could be good politics more generally, because what you hear from voters is that they don't want this division. They do want people to work together. And so when you can go out and show a picture of you shaking hands, or hugging, in this case, the Democratic governor as the Republican leader, that may actually convince some voters, especially independents, that you're doing the right thing.
He could have done it differently. Yeah. Actually, I've seen some polling numbers right before I walked in the door here that showing actually Republicans themselves are more favorably inclined than the rest of the country on greenhouse gas and cap and trade. So it doesn't hurt him. It actually helps the Republicans in that context. The issue is, though, you got the gas tax that's now coming forward, and people are really angry about that. And if this cap and trade actually raises gas prices by anywhere from the low end, the LAO says 15 to 73 cents a gallon, whole different story.
What's going to happen over 10 years, though? I would know.
All right. We are going to leave it there for all of you. Carla Marinucci with Politico, Marisa Lagos at KQED, and Republican strategist Sean Walsh. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We have been hearing a lot about self-driving cars. Big automakers and tech companies are racing to perfect technology to make that happen. Much of the innovation is happening here in the Bay Area, fueled by engineering talent, Silicon Valley startup culture, and putting prototypes through their paces. Here now to talk about the Bay Area's central role in the self-driving car industry are San Francisco Chronicle business reporters Carolyn Said and David Baker. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Carolyn, about 60 companies in the Bay Area are working on self-driving technology right now. How close is all this to becoming reality?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question. All those companies would tell you that they're something like 97% of the way there, but that 3% is crucial. You can't have a self-driving car that is going to make a mistake. Many of the major car makers and companies like Uber and Lyft have predicted that by 2020 or 2021, we will have fleets of robot taxis on the street, but not everywhere, just sort of phasing in. In fact, they already are phasing in. There are Uber has a fleet in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and in Phoenix. Waymo, which is Google, has a fleet in Phoenix as well, and Lyft will have some taxis in Boston by the end of the year. So there's little pockets of startup now, but all those cars now have safety drivers, so they're not autonomous 100% of the time.
And speaking of safety, that is one of the concerns, right, David? I mean, what are some of the other concerns about self-driving technology?
Well, I mean, that one takes paramount importance over absolutely everything else, because one of the main reasons that companies are pursuing this, the reason they're interested in the first place, is we lose something like 30 to 35,000 people each year in this country to car accidents. And if you can cut that down, that's a huge benefit to society. But that affects very much the way these cars will roll out, because if you think about it needing to be better than a human, what is satisfactory? Like 10 times better than a human? That means you'd still have 3,000 people dying. Now they'd be dying at the hands of a robot, in a sense. So these things have to be near flawless before people will accept them on the road.
And the crusaders behind robotic cars, right? They really view this as something that is very transformative. What do they say about it?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, they all cite the statistics. Worldwide, it's 1.3 million people are killed in car crashes, and something like 95% of those are people's fault. But then there are so many other potential ways that they could change our lives. There's, obvious ones like traffic. Traffic would flow more smoothly because all the cars would go at the same rate of speed, and they could be much closer together. There's climate change. The cars would be electric, so we're cutting down emissions significantly. And then there's parking. If we go to a model where instead of everybody owning their own car, we just have fleets of robot taxis and you subscribe to it like a service, like Netflix, then we don't need the 500 million parking spaces in this country. That's a landmass the size of Delaware and Maryland put together. So that's a huge amount of urban spaces that could be freed up for housing, for offices, for community buildings, for just other uses. So.
But there are critics out there who point out that what if hackers take over? What if a terrorist decides to put a bomb into a robotic car and sends it into a crowd?
There are a lot of efforts at the big automakers and the smaller companies too to focus on bulletproofing these from hackers and trying to stop up all the ways that they might try to get into the car and take control of it. But that second thing that you mentioned, the idea of basically someone just turning it into a low-speed cruise missile, putting an explosive programming in a destination, nobody has a great way to stop that yet. I've heard people suggest, okay, perhaps you could have chemical sniffing devices on the inside of these cars, but there's always a different way to make a bomb. So that's something that the companies are aware of. It's a problem they know they need to fix, but they don't have a fix for it yet.
And there's also the issue of jobs. You'll have a lot of taxi drivers, delivery drivers who will be losing jobs, truck drivers, millions and millions of people without a way to make a living. What will happen to them?
Well, that is a huge issue. On the other hand, you can say when the horseless carriage came into being, everybody said, what about the blacksmiths? What about the buggy whip makers? And yet that engendered whole new professions that had not been conceived of at that time. And hopefully the same thing will happen here. But it is something that we should be thinking about now, about retraining, about social safety nets for the millions of people who potentially could be put out of work within a decade or 2 decades if driving no longer is a human profession.
The bottom line, though, is that this is happening. So who has the edge right now, David? Is it traditional automakers such as Ford and GM? They're getting in on this as well. Or is it the tech companies who have the bigger edge?
It sort of depends on who you ask. I mean, there was a study that came out a couple months ago that argued that the traditional automakers have an edge, but that study itself sort of gave extra points if you were a big automaker that had experience rolling out cars. The big automakers did experiments with this technology for decades, but they never really dove in feet first until Google and other companies here in the Bay Area started leaping ahead of them. And suddenly Detroit realized, this is real. We can't get left in the dust. They ratcheted up their efforts. They started making partnerships with people here in the Bay Area. So they don't want to get left behind, but it's a mad scramble at this point, I'd say.
And from a regulatory standpoint, who is keeping an eye on all this to make sure that it's not a whole lawless situation? I know that we see these cars, these test cars on the roads in San Francisco, in Mountain View. So they have special permits to do so. But what is the state doing about this?
So the state has come up with a series of regulations, but what the car makers want is for it to happen at the federal level. And there are regulations at the federal level that are fairly open-ended and provide a framework for states to plug in their own rules. But the car makers say, well, that doesn't make sense. Suppose we have a self-driving truck going from New York to California. Is it going to stop at every state border and sometimes have to have a human get on board, or sometimes have to go at a different speed? Or so that is very much in process right now. It's a work in process, and there are a number of consumer advocates who are concerned that we're rushing too quickly to allow the cars without checking on safety, whereas the people making the cars would say you can't trample innovation by regulating it out of existence.
So fascinating, and the change is coming pretty quickly, too. Yeah. Thank you both, Carolyn Said and David Baker, San Francisco Chronicle business reporters.
Thank you.
From Broadway to San Francisco, the hip-hop musical Hamilton has been breaking box office records and winning hearts coast to coast. It showcases a diverse cast and brings to life the story of one of America's founding fathers. One member of the touring cast hails from San Jose and is performing in the hit show's San Francisco run. KQED arts reporter Rachel Myro sat down with Hamilton Ensemble member Ryan Vasquez.
Ryan Vasquez, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me about the role you play. Who do you play, and what role does he play in the story?
Yeah, so I'm James Reynolds, and he comes in the second act sort of as the linchpin to Hamilton's demise, sort of. He actually puts his wife on loan to Hamilton for some extra money, and that ends up getting out in this huge thing called the Reynolds pamphlet, which sort of begins the spiral of Hamilton's political career, sort of.
You're also an understudy for 3 major roles, including Alexander Hamilton. Have you gotten the chance to go on stage as Hamilton and other characters?
Yeah, actually, the day of my 25th birthday was my put-in rehearsal for Hamilton, so that's my exact conditions test, and it ended up being the next day that I went on for Hamilton for the first time. So that was really an exciting way to begin the year. And then I've been on as Aaron Burr a few times, and tonight actually will be my first performance as George Washington. So I'll have everything knocked out after tonight, which is a relief.
How do you keep it all straight in your head?
Yeah, it's really wild. It's definitely an all-hands-on-deck situation at Hamilton. Everyone's really working to the extent of their ability there. So I have, a tablet with all of my notes and all of the little diagrams and the audio of the parts that I sing and everything. So I just have basically a key that I can keep and sort of do a speed review before the show. And then you just cross your fingers and you hope that your brain and your mouth are coordinated enough to say all the words at the right time.
Now, you're a member of the touring cast, and obviously Hamilton was made famous on Broadway. Do you guys get the chance to put your own personal stamp on the show?
Yeah, it's been nice, actually, because the other companies, because there have been people coming in and out, they're sort of like a patchwork quilt almost, and we are still our original group from rehearsal in New York. So it's nice that we all had that 6 weeks of rehearsal and then we all moved here together. And so I think there's a special energy that is associated with this company because we all sort of created it together. And of course there's an outline. We're still doing the same Hamilton as is done in New York and Chicago and London soon, and but we, having been together from the start, I think have a sort of a special bond that is palpable, I think.
Now, before New York, there was San Jose. You're a local boy made good. And I believe you started in San Jose at the tender age of 8?
I did, yeah, I did. I did shows at the Children's Musical Theater of San Jose growing up from age 8 to post freshman year of college. I came back and did another show there, and so that's really where I got the bulk of my sort of theater education, and that mixed with, I went to Bellarmine College Prep for high school, and so that was a different sort of side of my education as a person and as a young man, and so I think all of those things kind of simultaneously working together allowed me to approach theater as a not just a hobby, but as sort of a business and a career, and taking it seriously. And so I attribute, I mean, the Bay Area and those experiences I had there a lot to the success that I've had, yeah.
Now, I imagine you get this question a lot, but given the nature of the story, an immigrant son made good in Washington, D.C., why are the tickets so darn expensive?
It is wild, yeah, it is. You know, demand is a crazy thing, you know, and I think what's interesting is I think it's good that the show, especially the traveling company that's going to be all over the country, is going to share a message with people from actually different sort of economic backgrounds. What's cool about Hamilton is because the tickets are so expensive, it's offset by the fact that we do something called Ham for Ham, which is a lottery system where you can see the show in the front couple rows for $10. And so it's nice because the expensive tickets allow, you know, people who would not be able to even see a Broadway show at all to come and see something that's sort of this pop culture phenomenon for, you know, a reasonable, you know, for just a Hamilton. So.
One last question. This is a very tough role that involves dancing and acting and singing. What's your favorite part?
I love, when playing Hamilton, it's going to be a unique experience because my girlfriend actually of many years is Eliza Hamilton, his wife. So when I do get to go on as that, that is my favorite part. Being able to share the stage with her is really unique and cool.
Ryan Vasquez, what a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.
And it really is a fantastic show if you haven't seen it. That will do it for us. Thank you for joining us. I'm Thuy Vu. For more of our coverage, as always, go to kqed.org/newsroom.